So perspective is a way of drawing that teaches us how to make things look more realistic. We are going to start today to learn the process of perspective. And this is one of the things that I included in today's lesson and the reason why we need perspective in our lives. This is a painting by Raphael, who you probably know as one of the first four great artists of the Renaissance, the first four artists to become world known: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello. This painting made Raphael famous because he used perspective. And he was kind of the first guy to figure out how to do that. So did a couple of things to make things look like there's depth in this painting, to make things look like they go into the distance. So the first thing he did was he placed his figures in a certain way. So you can see these figures down here. They look like they're closer to us as the viewer. And the reason they look like that is because they are lower down on the painting. So he put them towards the bottom of the canvas, and then the people that were behind them he put higher up. So these guys in the middle here, they're higher, and so they're farther away from us. Another way that he did that was he made them bigger here than they are up here. So a third way that he made them look like they were farther back in the painting was he overlapped them. So these guys are standing in front of the folks in the back, and you can't see those guys' feet because they're blocking them. They're overlapping them. These folks up front have more detail, like in their faces, than the guys back here. It's another trick to perspective. The last trick of perspective is the way that the lines are drawn in this painting. They all angle, all of these structural lines of the building here, they all angle and they come together at an imaginary point somewhere right here between these two guys' heads. By the way, this is supposed to be Da Vinci, and this is supposed to be Michelangelo. This fella is Donatello, and Raphael painted himself right over here, this little face peeking out. So somewhere between Da Vinci and Michelangelo, we've got this imaginary point to where if you drew all the lines of the buildings, it would come to that point. Even the lines in the floor here, if we traced them back, would still come to this point. And that's what we're going to focus on. We need to remember these other things like overlapping and lack of detail, putting things further down on the page. Those help us with perspective, but what we're going to try to master is this called linear perspective. So before Raphael, a lot of paintings looked like this. These folks are the same size as these folks, and so it's hard to tell which ones are closer to you and which ones are further away. And in fact, all of these folks are taller than these buildings down here. This artist didn't understand how to make things look like they were going into the distance. So it looks like they just slapped pieces together on a page. Not very realistic at all. Here's another example. If you look at it real close, you can probably figure out what's happening here. But basically, this is supposed to be an island. And these are folks that are sailing up to the island. But when we are looking at pictures of the ocean, we know that back here, where the ocean and the sky come together, would be so far away that these boats would appear tiny. You certainly wouldn't be able to see individual people and their details on them because they'd be so far away. The island itself would never overlap the boats. I mean, to me, this looks like a coin crushing boats in the ocean. And even the the castle here with the trees that are on the island, they look very flat. And so this is a problem for perspective. If we were going to paint a picture of a boat approaching an island, it would probably look more like this. This is how we think of it, of how to paint something like that. When we're so used to seeing things in perspective that we automatically know what doesn't look quite right. And that's going to be one of the first lessons you learn about perspective, is how to tell when things aren't quite right. You may not know how to fix it, but you can definitely tell that they're needing to be fixed. So for us, in the kind of artwork that is coming out today, here we have video art, something that you've probably seen before. And if you haven't, this is a great game called Donkey Kong. There is no perspective in this. This is one of the first games to become popular, and the designers did it very basically. It's very pixelated art. You can actually see the little square pixels, and everything is on a flat surface. Mario just goes up and down on this flat surface. There is absolutely no depth in this graphic. So in order to make it more appealing and more realistic, computer design artists figured out how to incorporate perspective. And here we have it. The next generation of computer graphics. So we still have the very pixelated, square looking art, but the squares are smaller so that the details are a little more pronounced. And we have an attempt here at going back into the distance. This game was called Frogger, one of my personal favorites. And you started with your frog over here, and you had him jump across the highway without getting smushed, and then jump on the logs. Everything was moving, so you had to aim him. And eventually he made it over here to safety. So you can tell he's going back into the distance, and the graphics still aren't great, but you can tell that there is depth in there a little bit. So here we have a much more advanced kind of computer graphic. The pixels are so small that you can't see them looking very boxy. If we were to expand this picture out, we could see it. So that helps the pixelation, absolutely helps with the graphics. But what also helps is that we now have perspective again. We've got these people standing in the front of the scene, and we can tell because they're the lowest down on the screen. They're overlapping these folks. Their bodies are drawn bigger than these bodies. We can see a little more detail in his face than we can in the faces back here. We've obviously got more detail, let's say, in this flower than in the flowers back there. And we also have those lines that I showed you in the School of Athens painting, where they go back to a point somewhere in the distance back here. And all of these lines are going to end up at that point. And it looks like maybe it's right around here. So even these lines, you see how they're all angled that way? Here's one. So that's the linear perspective that we're going to be learning. You got to remember all these things about placement and detail, but we're going to be focused on those leading lines. And here we have one of the more realistic games we've got out there. This is a great example of perspective because we've got not just flat structures, but now the structures have dimension. There's like shadow to help us interpret the depth. There's far away, you can see like really far into the distance. So computer graphics are becoming more and more like what we see with our own eyes. Using perspective will help your work look better, just like it helped in the medieval painters and the game designers.